we are not just interpreters. Uh, we are human beings. We have also our past, our history. The war in Bosnia and Herzegovina marked the rest of my life. Everything is somehow here, divided to the period pre-war and post-war. Still.
Hey, welcome back to BoostCast. I'm your host, Dieter Runge. BoostCast provides a unique global language industry and language business-centric experience with in-depth interviews as our centerpiece. Alongside and inside these conversations, we always try to infuse some language-related technology news, cultural highlights, reviews, occasional touch of music, art, and humor, but it's all from the perspective of where life intersects with language. My guest today, Darko Bartula. Darko is a seasoned senior conference interpreter, specializing in Bosnian, Croatian, Serbian, and Montenegrin to English interpretation. Darko excels in simultaneous, consecutive, and shukataj interpreting, and in his career, he's collaborated with international organizations like the UN, NATO, and the EU, interpreting for world leaders and diplomats in legal, government, medical, and financial sectors across diverse fields. Notably, among his vast experiences, time with the United Nations International Criminal Tribunal, where Darko was involved in the United Nations mission in Bosnia and Herzegovina, or otherwise known as UNMBIEH, in 1999. And we'll want to touch on that a little later in our discussion for sure. But Darko, before we get started, before we even go there, I wanted to let our audience know how you've been an instrumental part of the Boostlingo story and journey to date as well. You were literally one of the very first interpreters whom we recruited to help us field test and use the Boostlingo remote interpreting platform way back in 2015, providing feedback and helping us think about the interpreter's perspective and experience as we build out our product. So on behalf of the entire Boostlingo team, I really wanted to make a special mention of that, and that we are eternally grateful for the guidance that you provided back in the day. And the fact that we're here together on this podcast and you are still working with us to this day, it absolutely fills my heart. So thank you, Darko. Seriously, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Dieter. Thanks for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be reconnecting with you after so many years. You and your project actually changed my life, changed my career. When I started it back then in 2015-16, I never stopped it. Actually, there was no single day that I didn't use the Boostlingo platform, that I did not interpret on it, that I did not help clients bridge the language barrier. So I'm really proud that I can say on and off that I was one of the first Bosnian, Serbian, Croatian, Montenegrin interpreter for the Boostlingo platform, which is today enormously big project. And I'm so proud that I met you at the beginning, and now you are actually a celebrity. You travel all over the world promoting your project, but I hope we'll be able to associate again, personally, maybe somewhere.
Flattery will get you everywhere with me, Darko. You know that. No, Darko, can you?
No, I'm serious.
No, I appreciate it. I'm blushing now. Can you share with us, particularly with our audience, a little bit about your journey into the field of conference interpreting and translation? What drew you to specialize in the international criminal law and the type of events that you've ended up interpreting for?
Sure, thank you. Although I initially pursued a career in electrical engineering, the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, my home country, which began in 1992 when I was just 17, profoundly changed my trajectory. The conflict and its aftermath brought numerous international organizations and diplomats to the region, creating a significant demand for interpreters and translators. In 1997, at 22, I applied for an interpreter's position with the United Nations. And that's how it all started. The fact that I learned English in primary and secondary school contributed to that, but also the former Yugoslav countries' TV stations never dub English or American content. So we watched movies and MTV and everything since our childhood. And I think most of people here learned some English. Since I started with the UN, over the next 5.5 years, I worked as an interpreter for International Police Task Force, which was one of the UN's section, reforming the local police, and later with civil affairs, collaborating closely with diplomats and politicians. In 2003, when the so-called UNMIB, United Nations Mission in Bosnia and Herzegovina, closed down, I transitioned to the United Nations International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, which was completely different United Nations agency at that time, headquartered in The Hague, Netherlands, where I spent next 13 years as an interpreter and translator, primarily for the prosecutor's office, as well as the trial chambers and registry. Although I took on some conference interpreting assignments during that period of time, most of my work involved consecutive interpreting. As the tribunal began to wind down with all trials nearing completion and the organization significantly downsized or was downsizing, I left the UNICTY in 2015 with the highest commendations in performance reviews, just 2 years before its final closure in 2017. Following my departure, I transitioned to freelance interpreting, which allowed me to fully embrace conference interpreting and expand my expertise. I also took on remote, over the phone, and video remote interpreting assignments, which eventually led to the good fortune of connecting with you, Dieter.
Yeah, I mean, you're at Darko. I think you're going on 25 years of now in this space, right? Like close to
Almost 28.
almost 20. Oh my gosh, 28. So maybe let's talk about some of the challenges that you faced when you find yourself interpreting in some of these high stakes environments, and also maybe give us a sense of how you've seen the role of the interpreter evolve in the context of what you see in some of these international criminal law and UN agencies that you've worked for in the past.
Sure. The tribunal's mission to prosecute war crimes and deliver justice for victims often placed us in extremely challenging and high-risk situations.
Yeah.
Some witnesses, including insiders who provided critical information, were tragically murdered shortly after cooperating with us.
Yeah.
It was harrowing to read in the media about witnesses, sometimes even protected ones, being executed, often with a shot to the back of the head. Another challenge involved property searches of war crimes suspects, many of whom were fugitives at that time. Their families still resided in these homes, and although we were accompanied by NATO soldiers with full-face balaclavas and came with like 30 military personnel carrier vehicles and maybe 2 helicopters over our heads, only the tribunal investigator and I, as the interpreter, were unmasked. Arriving at around 3 a.m., we would deliver a court warrant and ask the family to gather in one room while soldiers conducted the search. The visibility left me worried about potential retaliation. One unforgettable moment came just the day after interpreting during the search of the home of a most wanted person indicted for war crimes, then and today war criminal. I served as an interpreter for the UNICTY president. UNICTY stands for United Nations International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. Maybe I will say a few times UNICTY. So I served as an interpreter for the UNICTY president during a meeting with Bosnian member of the presidency. I have even a media article here. I'll send you this picture as a scan. So the day after that search of the most wanted war criminal, actually I appeared, I worked as an interpreter for the president of the ICTY, Judge Patrick Robinson, and then member of the presidency, Mr. Nebojša Radmanović. This is me, later sitting
And there's
here.
your picture right there. Yeah.
Exactly.
Scary.
Basically, since that search was widely reported day before in the media, and since this was widely reported in the media day after, I knew the war criminal's family could have easily recognized me.
Yeah.
this possibility of retaliation felt very real, but fortunately, none of us in the UN staff ever experienced any consequences like that.
Yeah.
On one occasion, the son of a murdered man offered me an equivalent of $500 in local currency to reveal his father's killer. Ironically, just 2 days earlier, I had interpreted during a suspect interview with the killer himself. There was another occasion where a high-ranking military officer offered the prosecutor, investigator, and myself as an interpreter a new car each in exchange for erasing all records of our interviews with him. Despite these pressures, I always upheld professionalism and integrity and never allowed such offers to influence my work. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I got to ask you, I mean, this kind of work involves sensitive political and legal issues, obviously. Deeply emotive, harrowing stories. And yet you've got to be there in the moment providing these language services. How do you, I don't know if there's a special way that you can do this or there's a frame of mind you people, but how do you maintain that kind of neutrality and manage any emotional or personal response that you might, I mean, I don't think I would be cut out for that kind of job. But in a high tension scenario like that, I mean, what do you do? What is your method to just maintain sort of neutrality and be cool as a cucumber?
Well, ethical dilemmas at international criminal law are inevitable due to sensitive, high-stakes nature of the work. But as an interpreter, my role was to ensure communication with absolute neutrality, separating personal values from professional responsibilities. There were times when the content I interpreted clashed with my own experiences or beliefs. For example, I once interpreted for an individual whose wartime actions caused immense suffering to the citizens of Sarajevo. He was the one who the prosecutor faced with a document where it says shut down water to the Sarajevo citizens for next, let's say, 2 months. I'm not sure that, but it was a quite long period of time.
Yeah.
And I remember at that time we did not have water. People were trying to find all the ways to survive, and we were basically digging wells in the area, in the environment. And I'd learned at that time that if you just dig 5 meters down the soil, you will find water. So we found water everywhere in Sarajevo by digging those wells, but we had some pumps which actually gave us a small amount of water. So we had to wait like for 5 minutes to collect 5 liters or 1.5 gallons of water. And then people were queuing up in long queues, and after maybe some time, a shell would land and kill some of these people. So it was always a dangerous activity to go for water. However, when the shelling was happening, of course, nobody was outside. People were in shelters. And on one of these situations, my little sister, then only 3, said to my mother, "Mommy, now they're shelling outside. Let's go outside and collect water because there will be no people queuing at the water well." And they went because water was more valuable than life. Fortunately, they came back alive. And after maybe 15, 20 years, I'm being an interpreter in a room with the prosecutor and one then authority who ordered to shut down water to Sarajevo citizens. And of course, it was difficult for me to think about these experiences from the past, but though difficult to hear that, I set aside judgment and focused on accurate interpretation, knowing any bias would compromise the proceeding. On another occasion, I was offered a substantial bribe. I mentioned that before with regard to that these 3 vehicles. To reveal confidential information or some money to reveal who killed the father of a guy. But of course, rejecting it was straightforward for me because I understood that the trust in interpreters is fundamental to justice, and any breach would undermine not only the case itself, but the system as a whole. So I navigated such conflicts by relying on several principles. Let's say commitment to neutrality for me meant remaining focused on facilitating unbiased communication without influencing outcomes. Professionalism, definitely, where I concentrated on accuracy, tone, and flow to emotionally distance myself from the content, and reflection later after these um, events. I was processing ethical challenges afterwards with my colleagues to ensure that they did not affect my work and they would not infect my work in the future. So, yeah, while challenging these principles allowed me to uphold professionalism and integrity, contributing meaningfully to justice and honoring the
Yeah.
standards of my role.
It's me, and when I reflect back, I remember the Olympics in Sarajevo, and then the conflict, and how quickly things changed, and now we're 25, 30 years past those events, and we look at global conflict all over the planet still. We say never again, and here we are in so many different places on the planet observing exactly the same kind of thing again. um maybe
Those,
go ahead. I was gonna say,
no, I just wanted
I
to
just
add,
feel like,
too sad that international organizations like, yeah, please go ahead.
no, I was just saying, as we reflect on your time of being an interpreter for the United Nations in Bosnia and Herzegovina, you know, how do you contrast that with what you see in the news today? Like, does it evoke, those memories all back again? And what has changed, and what will change? I have a hard time. Those of us that have grown up in the West, who've never been, you know, in the midst of any of that kind of chaos, can't possibly uh, understand. Uh, and I know even for folks that have been in that, to articulate, uh, that experience, and then to have also been instrumental in interpreting and uh, providing language access and support to people in uh, very, very under very dire circumstances. How do you, on balance, like, how do you look at what's going on in the world today, and you know you know where do you see this going? Where do you see
Um,
this headed for the conference interpreter?
uh,
That's a very heavy question,
I'm
I know.
not.
It's a very
It's okay. It's okay. I'm not. I'm not. We had a saying in UN, and I'm sure it's also present everywhere, that we are not just interpreters. Uh, we are human beings. We have also our past, our history. The war in Bosnia and Herzegovina marked the rest of my life. Everything is somehow
yeah,
here divided to the period pre-war and post-war.
yeah,
Still,
yeah.
kind of 30 years after, almost 30 years after. So the fact that even worse atrocities are happening at the moment in Gaza, in Ukraine, in other places, uh, makes me very sad. And I realize that um, it is not so easy. These organizations, I worked for a noble organization which had noble uh, goals and worked on something which was really something to be proud of, but it seems they are powerless with these strong powers that are running the world, and have some greed or some other motive, which to me is not understandable. As
Mm.
you know, I like sports, I like nature, I like communication with people. I don't see why people have to ruin something. I don't understand that. My mind doesn't understand that.
It seems like
In
we take
case if there is ever. Mhm.
it seems like we take two steps forward and then two steps back again, two steps forward, and then episodically every 20, 30 years we get bombed 10 steps backwards again, right? It just
Exactly,
we're
exactly.
right back at the beginning, and like you said, in regions like Gaza and Ukraine, Darfur, uh, now Syria, like, everywhere that we see the folks just, and it's nonsensical. It really is. And well, I guess I'd be really curious to ask you, like, in those interpreting situations, how do you navigate the power dynamics in these settings? Like, what role do you feel the interpreter might play in conversations supporting those kinds of high stakes interpreting events?
Mm-hmm. Well, working with high profile individuals in legal and diplomatic contexts requires navigating complex power dynamics while maintaining professionalism and impartiality. The interpreter's role is to facilitate seamless communication, ensuring the focus remains on the parties involved while accurately conveying both meaning and the tone. Key strategies include professionalism, cultural sensitivity, and adaptability. With regard to professionalism, I'd say maintaining neutrality, discretion, and confidentiality builds trust and ensures the integrity of discussions. Cultural sensitivity encompasses recognizing and respecting diplomatic protocols and the nuances of formal language, which is essential. Adaptability, high profile conversations can be unpredictable, requiring flexibility and composure to handle unexpected shifts in tone or content. One particularly memorable experience that I'd like to share with you was interpreting a discussion between the renowned Queen's Counsel prosecutor Jeffrey Nice. He was the prosecutor in the famous case against Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic, who died in the prison or detention unit of the ICTY. And so there was a discussion between Mr. Jeffrey Nice and former Yugoslav president of presidency, Mr. Raif Dizdarevic. He's still alive. He's in his 97 or something like that. Very senior gentleman, but I'm happy that he's still alive because I could learn a lot from him. So both individuals used highly diplomatic and I might say aristocratic language, reflecting their extensive international experience. Mr. Nice, as a prominent barrister who got from Queen Elizabeth this title, Queen's Counsel, and Mr. Raif Dizdarevic, he was even before becoming president of presidency of the former Yugoslavia during 1988 and 1989. He was ambassador of Yugoslavia to many countries, including UK. So the conversation, lasting several hours, required me to carefully navigate through their eloquent exchanges. It wasn't until lunch that I realized Mr. Dizdarevic spoke flawless English. He kindly told me to take a break while they continued speaking directly. When I asked him why he hadn't corrected me or revealed his fluency earlier during my interpretations, he explained that during my interpretations, he was already preparing what to say for his next point. So his patience and consideration deeply impressed me and demonstrated the grace with which he conducted himself. Experiences like this illustrate how interpreters act as both facilitators and silent participants in significant conversations. And by navigating these settings with professionalism and precision, interpreters play a key role in fostering understanding and mutual respect among influential figures.
You've worked in a lot of different legal scenarios, legal environments. How would you say that the legal system in an international law might differ that from a national legal system? How would that impact the interpreter that is situated in legal interpreting on an international scale and in a sort of more of a national and regional scale? What are the differences that you've seen?
Mm-hmm. First of all, I spent most of my career at the International Criminal Tribunal, and interpreting in legal law enforcement and diplomatic settings differs greatly from national settings, in that sense that the legal systems that these two different courts use are different. For example, in the ICTY, we used something from Anglo-Saxon system, and we also use something from the continental civil law systems, which shaped the structure and practices of the tribunal. So this hybrid nature posed specific challenges and opportunities for interpreters, as it required adapting to varying legal traditions and their respective terminologies. For example, under the influence of common law prosecutors, particularly those from the United States, the tribunal introduced the practice of plea agreements or plea bargaining.
Mm.
This was a novel concept for many of us, as it did not exist in our local legal traditions at that time. I recall how significant this shift was, as plea agreements were eventually adopted in some national legal systems years later. The combination of these two systems meant adjusting to distinct courtroom dynamics. Common law proceedings were adversarial, with a strong focus on oral arguments and rapid exchanges during cross-examinations, requiring interpreters to work quickly and with precision. In contrast, civil law's inquisitorial nature, with its emphasis on written records and detailed investigations led by judges, demanded a different approach, one that required a strong grasp of procedural details and precise terminology. So this experience taught me the importance of flexibility, thorough preparation, and cultural sensitivity in legal interpreting, ensuring that I could effectively bridge gaps between distinct legal frameworks and enable clear communication in these complex settings.
Given the rise of remote interpreting and digital platforms, we've seen it has made interpreting more accessible. Some also argue that it's been more challenging in terms of maintaining quality and neutrality. Do you think that the shift to remote interpreting has in any way diluted the standards of interpretation services in international law?
Well, the shift to remote interpreting, which happened to me when I met you, and the shift to digital platforms has certainly made interpreting more accessible, allowing interpreters to work across borders without the logistical challenges of travel. However, it has also introduced complexities that can impact the quality and neutrality of interpretation services, especially in high-stakes fields like international law.
Yeah.
I'd like to mention some challenges and maybe some adaptations to maintain standards. And maybe we can discuss about it. What do you think about it? One of the challenges of remote interpreting was a loss of non-verbal cues.
Yeah.
Remote interpreting limits an interpreter's ability to observe body language, facial expressions, and subtle interactions in the room if it is over the phone interpreting.
Yeah.
Quite often, I interpret trials over the phone still today.
Yeah.
These cues are often critical for accurately conveying tone, emphasis, or intent in sensitive legal proceedings. The other challenge is technological barriers. This can be poor audio quality, unstable internet connections, and platform limitations, which can interfere with interpreters' ability to hear clearly and deliver accurate interpretation. Such issues can disrupt the flow of proceedings and potentially affect the fairness of communication. Another challenge is reduced neutrality perception. The virtual setting can sometimes create a sense of detachment or reduce the perceived impartiality of interpreters. In face-to-face settings, interpreters are physically present and visible, reinforcing their neutrality as a bridge between parties. With regard to adaptations to maintain standards, despite these challenges, the rise of remote interpreting does not necessarily mean a dilution of standards, provided that interpreters and institutions adapt effectively. Training, for example, and preparation. I think I passed more than 200 different training courses since I started working as an OPI and VRI interpreter for different language agencies which provide their different trainings, and they have different mandates that they have to fulfill. But interpreters must be equipped to handle remote platforms and adapt their skills to the unique demands of virtual settings, such as, for example, delays or unclear audio. Enhanced technology. Courts and institutions must invest in robust platforms with high quality audio and video to ensure interpreters can perform their roles effectively. For example, we interpreters, it's always expected from us to have headset for HIPAA reasons so that we can be heard properly. But still, very rarely, the parties we interpret for, providers and
it could be anything, right? Anything under the sun.
LEPs, they don't use any of that. Yeah. So we always, I, for example, depend on always investing into best equipment possible so that I can adjust the quality of sound. Yeah. The other thing that is the adaptation to maintain standards is neutrality reinforcement. Establishing clear protocols for remote settings can help maintain the interpreter's perceived impartiality, even in virtual environments. So in my experience, remote interpreting requires more preparation and adaptability from the interpreter. While it can never fully replicate the nuances of in-person communication, it can still meet high standards if both interpreters and institutions commit to addressing its challenges. So the key is to ensure that the tools and processes support the interpreter's ability to deliver accurate and unbiased communication, even in the digital space.
Yeah, it's always interesting for remote interpreters. You never know what the next setting is going to bring, right? Sometimes it's a fairly easy transition, and other times it brings with it so many things that you weren't prepared for or did not expect. I guess, and of course we have to touch on AI. AI is, the subject du jour, and certainly in the legal, in the language industry, more so, for the interpreting and translation space, we see the growth of the use of AI for interpreters and translators. Do you think that this use of AI will undermine these human elements of the profession, especially when we look at legal and diplomatic settings? Darko, what's your perspective on the future of AI in this field, particularly with your experience in the criminal justice, international criminal justice, and international criminal court spectrum? Like, where do you see AI as a positive and also perhaps as a negative role in that?
Yeah. Maybe I should start with other questions first, and then maybe end with where do I see the future of AI in the profession. First of all, technology, including AI, I apologize, and remote interpreting platforms has significantly impacted conference interpreting and translation, of course, especially in legal, diplomatic context, as you said. These advancements bring both opportunities and challenges. So some of the positive impacts are increased accessibility. So remote platforms let interpreters participate in proceedings worldwide, eliminating travel barriers and broadening access. Efficiency gains. AI tools like transcription software and terminology databases reduce preparation time and enhance accuracy in high-pressure assignments. But on the other hand, some challenges. AI has limitations. Despite advancements, AI lacks cultural sensitivity and contextual understanding, making human interpreters essential for nuanced communication. Loss, for example, the other example is loss of nonverbal cues. The remote settings reduce the ability to observe body language, critical in legal and diplomatic context. Infrastructure also dependency. Reliable internet and platforms are crucial, as technical issues can disrupt proceedings. With regard to adaptation in high-stakes fields, technology should complement, not replace, human interpreters. Artificial intelligence aids preparation with glossaries and transcription, but cannot match human discretion in sensitive contexts. Remote platforms require additional training to manage delays and virtual dynamics effectively. With regard to where do I see the future of AI in the profession, or should interpreters be worried, for example?
Yeah.
Rather than worrying, interpreters should focus on how technology can enhance our skills. The demand for human interpreters in legal and diplomatic contexts remains robust, but professionals must adapt to a technology integrated future by leveraging AI tools to improve preparation and efficiency, focusing on honing the human aspects of interpretation, such as cultural competence, emotional intelligence, and ethical judgment. In conclusion, AI will continue to play a supporting role in the profession, streamlining tasks and increasing accessibility. However, the core of legal and diplomatic interpretation, which are accuracy, trust, and human connection, will always require skilled professionals. So interpreters who embrace technology while emphasizing their unique human strengths will thrive in the evolving landscape.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're seeing already that we're already seeing the limitations of AI in the context of interpreting. Uh, and to your point, interpreters who are upskilling and continuing to leverage some of these technologies to augment their uh, delivery of interpreting services will, I think, will prosper. We all, find ways to use technology to streamline the things that we do. Some of the more repetitive, banal tasks can be relegated to these new technologies, and they do a pretty good job. And then there's certain things where emotional intelligence and just the human touch. I just don't see that anytime in the near future as being something that, like you said, if AI can't read the room, it's not going to be able to look at body language or uh, do a vibe check, and couldn't be something more important that you need to do in international crime tribunals. I mean, goodness. Um, we're running close to time, but there's a couple of things I wanted to still talk to you
Sure.
about. We have to tackle it in a subsequent podcast. But what there's just so much. You've such a storied career in this. I What advice would you give to? I go to a lot of conferences. I was just recently at OSIT here in Australia. Um, I'm listening to a lot of podcasts and webinars, and people are very, very concerned about there's not enough enrollment in academia for new interpreters and translators and professional linguists. And I want to try to give a message of positivity and hope and excitement to folks to continue to forge a path forward as a language professional. So I'd be very keen to get advice from you for the young professional or the interpreter or translator just starting out, entering the field of interpreting translation, and especially those who may aspire to work in a high level international context like you have. What would guidance would you give? What top two, three things would you say to someone entering the field now, knowing what you know?
Sure. My advice is to focus on a combination of technical skills, cultural awareness, and professional development.
Yeah.
Success in this field requires more than just linguistic ability. It demands a deep commitment to learning, adaptability, and professionalism. Here are some key tips that I can say. Number one, master your languages.
Yeah.
Achieve near native fluency in your working languages and specialize in fields like legal or diplomatic terminology, medical terminology, financial terminology. In these days, AI or IT terminology. Number two, be a lifelong learner. Always stay teachable. That's something that I learned more than 20 years ago. We should always stay teachable. So, lifelong learner, stay informed about global affairs and continuously improve your interpreting techniques. Number 3, cultivate cultural sensitivity. Understand the cultures of your languages and practice empathy to build trust in sensitive situations. Number 4, maintain ethics. Be neutral, confidential, and honest about your limits. Seek clarification when needed. Number 5, gain experience. Start small, network, and learn from experienced interpreters.
I think it's an
Number
important
6,
one.
embrace technology.
That's a big one. And every time I bump into interpreters all the time, I ask them, what are you doing to promote your career? And a lot of times I get crickets. Well, let's talk about what you could do to expand on that career. But
I have also a little bit of room for improvement within that one. When we were about to close down the UNICTY, they sent us some psychologists who taught us how to overcome the transition period.
Yeah.
And amongst other things, I remember that they told us that we should not see ourselves, again, the same story, only as interpreters, and we should maybe understand that we may be working in other fields afterwards. Even I myself, between the full-time employment and my freelance interpreting career, worked a little bit as a real estate agent. So they told us you should build your LinkedIn profile. Yeah. And then in that profile, you should put all the skills you can imagine that you can do. You are not just people who know the language and who communicate and who bridge the language barriers. You can also be great IT experts, great administrators, drivers, personal assistants. And at that moment, we had an exercise, and I actually started listing what else can I be besides interpreter. Yeah. And I remember now that it was like 2 full pages, like more than 40 different things. But then I built the basic shape of my LinkedIn profile, which made one of the Boostlingo clients contact me, providing the opportunity to interpret. And then I got in touch with you, who taught me how to use the platform. So LinkedIn basically connected me to you. After that, from time to time, I post something, but I'm not so active because I simply have too much work that I don't need to have more. And I'm not about promoting myself that much. Maybe this podcast will, I don't know, change some things. Maybe I will change also my approach. But definitely networking and sharing from experienced colleagues, that definitely is one of the...
I think you touched on a really important point, actually, Darko, which is that, recently at the OSIT conference, I spoke to a lot of students who were studying to be interpreters and translators. And it was interesting to me that I asked them about other roles in the language industry that they might be interested in, or where they might see themselves working in 5-10 years or so. And there really was a very limited perception. And I just wonder, career planning in these schools, it's like, it's almost as if academia exists outside of the rest of the language industry, and there's not enough advocacy for, hey, yeah, absolutely, you could be an interpreter, but guess what? You could also be a project manager at a language service company, or you could be a vendor manager at a company that requires these language skills. There are so many facets of in the world of multilingual communication where having learn the discipline of being an interpreter or a translator and being so knowledgeable in your language pairs is so important, where I don't, AI is going to support these roles again, but being a naturally gifted linguist and having those IT skills, as you mentioned, opens up a world beyond in the language industry. And I think, I guess it's incumbent on us, veterans, right, to continue to give that message of hope and positivity. But I really think that it starts in the schools and the places that provide these training, and even the organizations that provide, agencies that provide professional development courses to evangelize the opportunities that are out there. Anyways, I'll get off my soapbox, but you do bring up a really good point about that. Do you see any just sort of like one last point on that? Do you see any trends that maybe from your perspective that may be shaping the future of legal and particularly criminal or diplomatic criminal trials, international trials, and diplomatic interpreting, and anybody that is leaning towards sort of that area of interpreting? Are there any emerging areas or specialties that new interpreters might consider or be aware of? Is there anything in particular that?
Sure. May I just say something else before I answer that? Something related to the previous point. I don't know if the time allows.
Yeah, absolutely.
We interpreters, we were always taught that we should know a little bit of everything. We should know a little bit about football, a little bit about politics, a little bit about food, a little bit about music, art, everything. So interpreters should not be generally experts in something, like something very narrow, but we should know a wide variety of things. So that is true for every interpreter who has some kind of career behind himself or herself. After maybe 10 or 20 years, definitely you've seen a lot. And we should, in case if some of us could not adapt to the evolving changes of the AI industry and everything, if some of us cannot adapt, we should not be closed to the option that we can do something else, because we are very versatile people, and with communication we can do all sorts of things. We can be perfect public affairs officers. We can be perfect communication experts. We can be perfect stewardesses. We can be perfect sports people, all sorts of things. So there is always a hope and a potential and future for us interpreters, because our foundation is great. We know a lot about many things. And if you allow me, I can now try to answer your question.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely have time to squeeze it in. Again, just any off the top of your head, like any trends or anything that you are watching happen in real time and thinking, yep, that's, if I was jumping into the interpreting racket now, this is what I would look at. Or spend some energy in anyways.
Thank you. The future of legal and diplomatic interpreting, but I also would say interpreting in general, is being shaped by several key trends that new interpreters should be aware of. Increased use of remote interpreting. The demand for virtual platforms continues to grow, making remote interpreting a standard practice in legal and diplomatic settings. Interpreters must become proficient with these technologies and adapt to the unique challenges of virtual communication, such as managing delays and maintaining engagement. Another one is maybe integration of AI tools. The AI is being increasingly used for transcription, terminology management, and even basic interpretation. While it cannot replace human interpreters in nuanced settings, familiarity with these tools can enhance efficiency and preparation. Another one is focus on cultural and emotional intelligence. As global diplomacy becomes more complex, interpreters will need heightened cultural sensitivity and emotional intelligence to navigate sensitive discussions and diverse cultural contexts effectively. Specialization in emerging fields, areas like international environmental law, cybercrime, a global health are growing in importance. Interpreters with expertise in these fields will be in high demand in both legal and diplomatic contexts. Then emphasis on the multilingual proficiency. As international cooperation expands, interpreters fluent in multiple, widely used and regionally applied languages will have a significant advantage. So, new interpreters should invest in mastering these trends, staying adaptable and continuing to develop both their technical and cultural skills to thrive in this evolving profession.
Fantastic. Darko, I really want to thank you for your time today. It's very special to reconnect with you today and have this conversation with you, especially considering the journey of Boostlingo and your continued evangelization of the remote interpreting profession, and you epitomize the interpreter that has embraced the technology and is helping carve a path forward with it. So my just really appreciate your what your trailblazing and just, you know, we didn't barely touch on some of the stories. I'm sure that when I look at some of the, you know, the things that you've interpreted for, there are some stories I probably don't want to hear because they'll probably give me nightmares. But what you do, your work is just so darn important, and really appreciate, you know, how you've put yourself out there in those circumstances. I can only imagine. I can't relate, but I can imagine what it might have been like. And I look forward to expanding on some of those stories in a future episode of BoostCast with you at some point. It'd be great to dive a little deeper on some of the interpreting stories that you have. So thank you so much for joining us today, and look forward to reconnecting soon in real time, somewhere in Europe, or maybe somewhere in at an event in the US, but maybe in the Alps. I know you're an avid skier and an avid snow buff, and that's still on my bucket list.
It will be my pleasure.
Still on my bucket list. It will be
my pleasure, and now it goes on the record that I host you on one of the Alps.
I'll hold you to it, Darko.
Ski resorts. There are many of them. They are fantastic. On the other hand, thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this noble project of yours. Thank you for your service to the community in general. You founded the platform which I believe now unites the whole world. I receive calls from Australia quite often. I receive calls from Canada, from UK. At the beginning, it was just US. So I am aware how this is expanding. Thank you for starting this BoostCast project as well. I'll be happy if I can contribute in any way in the future, but I'm sure there are many other colleagues who are equally or far more qualified than I am. So it will be also pleasure and honor for me to hear their stories.
Wonderful.
Thank you to your team.
Well, we're deeply honored that you joined us.
Looking forward to seeing you
here on BoostCast, Darko. Thank you so much, and we want to thank you for your time here today. Thanks so much.